In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the upper ball joint on this Dodge Ram 2500. Let's get started. Use a 24mm socket and remove all 8 of your lug nuts. If your vehicle has a cover here, well, you're going to want to pull that off first. Mine does not, so I'm just going to remove all these and then take the wheel off. With an 18mm socket, I'm going to remove the 2 caliper and bracket assembly bolts that hold it onto the front axle, and I'll put the whole assembly aside. No need to separate anything. These can be fairly tight. Might have to break them free by hand first. If that's the case, grab yourself a breaker bar. There we go. Now you should be able to remove these bolts. There's one. Leave this in a couple threads so it can hold the caliper while you remove the lower one. Take this out. Take that other bolt out, set it aside, and at this point you should be able to remove the caliper, bracket, and pads off of the rotor. I'm going to set it right up here and bungee cord it so that it's out of my way. I do not want to put any pressure on the brake hose. If you pull on this, it will get damaged. I'm going to use the bungee cord and tie the caliper up just so that it doesn't fall off. There we go. Now you can remove your rotor. If it's stuck on from rust buildup, you can either hit the backside or just hit it right in between the lug studs. That should break it free. The axle nut will have a cotter pin going through it. You're going to want to get that straightened out. And then, hopefully yours isn't seized and stuck in there. Pull it out of the axle. Usually if you just use some side cutters, it's very good at grabbing onto it. You could just cut it off, but sometimes it's easier to remove it in one piece. And do not reuse these, always use a new one. Now you're going to need a 1 11/16 socket, and with that you should be able to remove the axle nut. It shouldn't be extremely tight, but still having a power tool does make things easier. Okay, take it off. There is also a washer here, remove that as well. Usually there is supposed to be some sort of bracket here that holds the ABS wire. Mine's missing, so I'm going to move along. We have to unclip it off of all of the other retainers. Some are along the brake hose, and all you have to do for these is just pull them out. That one already came out. Just like so, follow it up. There's one right behind this control arm that's hiding. They all look the same. This right here looks like it has a push clip style retainer that has the slide out. So I'm going to use a trim tool for that one. Oh, okay, that wire tie broke, but I will be removing this to replace it with a new one. There's that. And if you follow it up a little bit more, you'll see the electrical connector for it. It has a push clip here, so if you stick your trim tool and pull it through, you'll be able to pull it down to access the connector. The tab that locks it in is on this side here, so press it, wiggle it, and remove the ABS sensor wire. Pull it through all the way so that you can have it wrapped up around the wheel bearing. It is a fairly long wire. You don't want it to get tangled up while you're working. So I just like to set it over here. With an 18mm socket, if you turn the knuckle, you should be able to access these bolts. There are 2 on this side and 2 on the other side. They basically form a square. Having said that, remove all 4. My bolt up top here was actually somewhat rounded, so I had to put an extractor socket on it. Hopefully yours is not like that. Obviously, if you have any bolts that are damaged like this, or whether they're completely rotted on the threads, replace them, and make sure you replace them with a proper grade bolt, just like the manufacturer intended for this bolt to be, otherwise it could cause issues. And that's exactly what I'm going to do with this one. Once I remove it, I'm going to discard it and get a new one. Having said that, the other ones should be a little bit easier to remove with a regular socket. There it is. Same on the bottom, 18mm socket. Same on the other side, 18mm socket. Because the tie rod's in the way, you might need a swivel for this. There's one. And let's get the bottom out. There's the bottom. Now you're going to want to take a hammer and tap the wheel bearing side to side. At the same time, make sure the axle separates from the hub itself, so you might have to tap this in as the wheel bearing comes out. It's already separating on this side. I'm going to use an air chisel and go around the base of this wheel bearing. It's starting to separate, it's just fairly stuck. So I'm going to use this to not only push it off, but the vibrations from it should help break the rust free. Okay, push the axle through. There it is. And just so you can see what I did, I went with the chisel bit on this side and that side, moved it back and forth, and then popped it right out. If you still have a backing shield, at this point it would come off with the wheel bearing. Now you can pull the axle shaft out. Sometimes you might need a pry bar on the back side just to help pop it through. There we go. Slide it all the way out, and there it is. Now remove the tie rod nut so that we can separate it. We're going to pull the knuckle off, of course, but I want this out of the way. Sure, you could leave it connected and push it to the side, but I would rather just get it out of my way. 21mm socket on this. Okay, this one broke free. A lot of times what you can do is put the nut back on, tap it down with a hammer, or hit the side of the knuckle. That should allow it to break free. In my case, it fell right off. It is fairly new, so I'm going to remove this. I'm going to hang this tie rod over here and bungee cord it so that it doesn't hang. When it hangs down like that, it's actually just pulling on the other side ball and socket joint. I'd like to avoid that, so I'm going to tie it out of the way here. I'm going to remove the cotter pin. That way I can pull the ball joint mounting nut off. If you can get a power tool in here, go ahead. If not, you're going to have to do it by hand. 27mm socket is what you'll need for this mounting nut. The knuckle's going to want to spin. So turn it, break it free. It shouldn't be extremely tight. Once you broke it free, you should be able to spin it by hand. Remove this the rest of the way. Do the same to the bottom. Get this cotter pin out. .34mm socket on this one. Once you take it off, I recommend putting it back on a few threads so that when the knuckle drops down, it doesn't actually fall off. It'll be stopped by the mounting nut. Hit the knuckle with a hammer here and here. That should break it free and allow it to drop down. There we go. Remove the mounting nut. And remove the knuckle. The upper ball joint will come up through the top, so put a receiving cup on here. I'm just going to put this adapter in place because my cup actually has a hole in it. So once With that done, put whatever adapter fits in your situation on the bottom. Get your ball joint press in. And I'm probably going to have to swap this adapter out about halfway through, but at least with this, it'll start coming off. Okay. That's it. There's your upper ball joint. The boot got stuck in here, so did my spacer. There it is. If necessary, use a little wire brush and clean the mounting area for the upper ball joint. You want to make sure the new one slides in nice and smooth. Spray it down with some brake parts cleaner. Cover the axle tube so it doesn't go in there. Wipe it off. Spray it down with a little bit of grease or anti-seize before you install. Install the ball joint from top to bottom. Find a cup that fits on the outer lip of the top here. Try to get it started nice and flat. It's not going to be perfectly straight up and down because the whole axle is tilted, but make it nice and level. That should be good right there. If it starts going at an angle when you press it, you need to stop and straighten it out, otherwise it will damage either the mounting area here or the ball joint itself, neither of which is a good thing. On the bottom, I'm using a cup that is cut so that on this end it actually can curve down. Otherwise, if you use a flat one, it's probably going to go at an angle, which is going to mess up the way it gets pressed in. So if you have one like this, definitely recommend using that. And a spacer on the bottom so I can actually press on something because this cup has a hole in it. So let's press it down. With the ball joint fully installed, you want to check at the top to make sure there is no gap whatsoever. If there is, continue pressing it until it is completely bottomed out. Grab your knuckle, slide it on. Have one of the two mounting nuts at least ready, so you can slide them on. There we go. I have both, so I'm going to put this one on as well. This new mounting nut is a 32mm socket. Tighten up your lower ball joint. The torque for this is 100 foot-pounds. That's 100 foot-pounds, but the slot for the castle nut has to line up. Mine's right here, and to line it up, you always want to keep tightening and never loosen. Stick your cotter pin in, and to lock it in, you're going to want to bend it down and over. I like to leave a little bit of wiggle room on it. That way it's less likely to seize up. 24mm socket on this mounting nut for the top ball joint. Tighten it down. The torque on this one is 69 foot-pounds. The slot for the cotter pin does not line up, so I'm going to keep tightening. Stick your cotter pin through, and to lock it in, you're going to want to bend it over. A little tricky to reach. Definitely want to make sure it's out of the way of the axle shaft. Get your tie rod, turn the knuckle, and stick this through. Put the mounting nut on. Let's tighten it up. 21mm socket on this one. The torque on this is 40 foot-pounds and an additional 90 degrees, which is just a quarter turn. That's 40 and a quarter turn. Looking inside the axle tube here, you'll see that there is quite a bit of dirt. This is normal. There is no seal until pretty much all the way in there. So you're going to want to do your best to remove as much dirt as you can. Don't spray anything in there. Don't use compressed air because anything like that will actually push it further in. You don't have to get it perfectly clean, but what I will do is take a rag and try to sweep some away. If you have a long brush that'll get in there and pull the dirt out, that's fine too, or a vacuum cleaner of some sort. Basically, when you install the axle, you don't want to get anything on it so they can then go in the differential. So I'm just going to try to pull away some of this dirt. And as I slide the new axle in, I'm going to be careful to not drag it along the bottom. Not going to be the easiest thing to support it like this, but it's what you have to do. Slide the axle shaft in, and like I said, try not to drag it along. So I'm going to put my hand in here and support it. Now when you reach the end of the axle tube, you'll feel that it wants to hit that seal. Be careful with it. You don't want to damage the seal. You want it to slide in, and you might also have to spin it around so it can match up with the splines of the differential. So at this point, it is mostly bottomed out. It just needs to get over that locking clip. To do that, you can just press it in like this. There we go. You can hear it bottom out once that happens, and you'll know that it is if this piece of metal here, this ring, is behind the knuckle where the bearing mounts. If that is the case, you're good to go. You're going to want to clean the knuckle where the bearing mounts, inside, outside. Mine is rusty, but really it's not rotted. It doesn't have chunks of rust built up. So I'm just going to take a wire wheel on a drill and just clean up around it, mostly so that the bearing can mount nice and flush and not sit kind of at an angle if it doesn't seat on all the way. Now that it's all cleaned up, doesn't have to look perfect, just has to be nice and flat. Rinse it down with brake parts cleaner. Once it dries, I'm going to put some anti-seize on it so it doesn't corrode in the future. Apply a thin coat all the way around on the outside as well as on the inside, as well as on the splines of the axle. There we go. If you put too much, it'll just squeeze out when you put the wheel bearing on. It's going to make a mess. Now to reinstall, I'm going to put the ABS wire through the backing shield and make sure it's facing with that cutout at the top. Careful of your ABS wire. Try to hook it onto one of these studs. Slide everything together onto the axle. Once you get it on the axle, it's not going to fall off. It'll support it, but you got to push it up and into the knuckle, and you can get this wire out of the way now, and you will be able to turn everything to line up the bolt holes, which obviously has to be done. So at this point, I think it's pretty much lined up. So let's go behind it, stick all the bolts in, and gonna make sure they all start before any get tightened. Slide in one of the bolts, whatever lines up first. Might have to move the backing shield as well as the wheel bearing around to get the threads lined up. Once they line up, if you cleaned up your threads, if they were rusty, it should thread on nice and smooth, which is the case for me. I'm pretty much just bringing it in all the way by hand, which is great. Do the same to all of them. I like to have them all started and close to being bottomed out before I tighten them, just in case this has to move around, because if you tighten one, you can't move it anymore. There we go. Let's move to the other side. On the other side, slide in your bolts. That one's in, and the bottom one. All right, let's tighten these up. With the bottom on the other side tight, let's do the top on this side, going in a cross pattern. And then bottom on this side. And then we'll move to the top on the other side. Let's finish tightening this top one on the other side. Now we can torque them all. 149 foot-pounds is the torque. That's one. Okay, that's the second one. Let's move to the other side and torque the other two. That's one. And two. Let's resecure the ABS wire. I'm going to start on the second clip. The first one is a little too far away from me now, so once I put the caliper back, I will reattach it. Just follow it along, and every little rubber piece here should line up with a clip that it secures in. So just press it in. This one's hiding behind this control arm. Pull it up, the ABS sensor. This has a new clip on it, and a retainer. So press that into its mounting location, right by the brake hose. The brake line. And then this gets clipped into the electrical connector. Make sure you have it the right way. Click it. Once it clicks, lock it in and secure it here. If you want to use a wire tie on this, go ahead. But if you just tuck it behind the fender liner here like that, it shouldn't go anywhere. Install the washer that goes over the axle nut and reinstall the axle nut. Let's tighten it up. I'm not using my impact to do the final tightening. I'm just using it to get it close. That stopped spinning, so let's grab the torque wrench. To torque this, the torque is 263 foot-pounds. I have a pry bar going through the lug studs here to hold this from spinning so I can actually torque it, and my torque wrench on the axle nut. That's it right there. Install a new cotter pin. Don't reuse your old one. If your axle nut, after you torqued it, doesn't line up with the cotter pin slot, continue tightening. Never loosen. Mine actually lines up, so I'm going to grab this, bend it over. There we go. Let's coat the hub in a thin layer of anti-seize to prevent this from rusting in the future, especially once the rotor goes on here and it stays here for an extended period of time. Avoid the lug studs if you can. If you get any anti-seize on them, just wipe it off. Let's install the rotor. I'm using a new one. If you're using your old one, you might have to clean up inside here where it mounts on the hub. Sometimes they get rusty. Sometimes they're good to reuse. Having said that, press it on. And to avoid it falling off like this, I'm going to use a lug nut and thread it on all the way. This is going to hold the rotor in place so it doesn't keep flopping around as I install the caliper. Now let's get the caliper back on. Remove your support, whatever you had here. Take the caliper, flip it over, and bring it right over the rotor. Make sure the pads fit on here. Might have to wiggle it to get it to line up. Once you line it up, have at least one bolt ready to start onto the threads here so that you can let go of the caliper. This one's started on. Start on the bottom. Might have to move it around a little to find those threads. Let's snug it up. And the top. The torque for these is 250 foot-pounds. That's torqued. The ABS sensor wire has this rubber piece here, so if you had the bracket that goes with it, of course, clip it on. If not, just make sure it's going to be out of the way of everything, which it is for me, especially since it's behind the backing shield here. It should be good, but obviously, if it has the bracket, clip it back on. This U-joint is greasable, so I will take a grease gun clip it on here and pump grease into it until you can see it come out through the caps. There we go. At this point you can stop, remove the grease gun, wipe off any excess grease. You don't want it flinging around here. Make sure it's clean everywhere. On the other side as well. Looks good. It's important to keep this greased up as well in the future. About every oil change, add some grease to these. That way it can stay well lubricated. You can remove this lug nut that you put on for safety. And let's get the wheel on. Press it on all the way. Install all 8 of your lug nuts in a cross pattern, bottom them out, and then also in a cross pattern, torque them to 140 foot-pounds. Let's torque these lug nuts to 140 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Double check them if you want. At this point, if your wheel had the lug nut cover, snap it back on. It just clips on. If not, there you have it.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.